Here, read this.
Woof.
Hello everybody, Ash here from the Here Read This podcast. Today I'm going to be reacting to an absolutely rotten documentary made by Armando Iannucci about Milton and Paradise Lost. If you're new here, what I do on Here Read This is short videos like this, as well as longer podcasts about poems and works of literature of all shapes and sizes, really. And they tend to be, I don't know, between half an hour and an hour mark. But for several months now, many months, I've been working on an epic podcast on Paradise Lost. It's going to be excruciatingly long. It's a bit of an experiment. Basically, I was, you know, I've always been aware that podcasts have the reputation of being bloated, baggy, and far too long for words. And I kind of wanted to try one out once. It might be a one-time thing. It might be fun to do something of that length again, but break it up into multiple parts. I'm really excited to get it out there because I have been working on it for ages and have pretty much been reading Paradise Lost all year. So in order to kind of build up a little bit of buzz for it, hopefully, I'm going to make a few shorter videos like this to sort of talk up the podcast and see what other people say. So I found this documentary. It's all on YouTube. If you want to see lots of Armando Iannucci pretending to read Paradise Lost in a variety of urban environments, it is, as I say, all on YouTube. It's a BBC documentary, but it's there at the moment. I'll link it below. It's got a really good reputation. Like, all the reviews I've read of it were very complimentary. I don't understand why. Iannucci makes a complete sneering prat of himself.
He's going to justify the ways of God to man, and yet he doesn't. His God is a dull God. Is that deliberate?
The documentary has absolutely no information about Milton that you couldn't glean within 15 seconds of Googling his name.
You have to start with individual words, of course, but it's the way Milton puts them together that's the really stunning bit.
It's full of sort of typical BBC cringy ideas for bits. There's a bit where he goes into a school.
They're all happy to make time for the poem, in between bouts of Club Penguin and Nintendo Wii Crazy Golf.
There's a bit where he goes to talk to David Blunkett. I guess the idea there was that Blunkett is political.
And he's blind.
Too strongly, but I'm not a Milton. But
Iannucci goes and sneers at places that Milton lived.
I'm not sure he would want to have died here.
For Milton to see all this for the first time, especially after coming from, well, you've seen Horton.
And sneers at the general public. It starts with this absolutely mad bit where he's on a bridge.
I'm convinced that John Milton is our nation's greatest poet.
Excuse me?
But pretty extensive field research on a bridge reveals...
Who's that?
No idea.
...that most people can't even recognise the poor chap.
Do you recognise that man?
No.
What, even that kid?
Has anyone here heard of John Milton? Anyone?
Anyone except me know who Milton is. What gets me is this guy helps create Alan Partridge, and here he is on a bridge shouting at people. Do you not know who Milton is? Do you know Milton? Where they broke codes in World War II? No, you're thinking of Milton Keynes. I mean, he's just gutted that none of these people know about Milton. If only we had some kind of national broadcasting corporation that could provide some free educational cultural programming instead of sending an Oxford graduate to sort of sneer at them on a bridge.
OK, Milton is deeply unfashionable. But why?
But why? Why are my tastes so outre and out there and no one else's are? Oh, I hope you're as excited as I am to find out.
Gloomy.
Gloomy?
Yes.
OK.
Long-winded.
Long-winded.
OK, and what about Milton?
I think it's going to be miserable. I haven't read it, but
She hasn't read it. It's tough having gone to Oxford and being like the only person who's read stuff.
Before I went into comedy, I spent 3 years as a student at Oxford trying to write a PhD on Paradise Lost. No one was more surprised by that than me.
Sometimes I just fascinate myself.
John Milton mean anything to you?
Yep.
Yes? Yes? You've heard of John Milton?
Of course.
When I say John Milton to you, oh, bless you, I've found someone. Have you read Paradise Lost or read it? Yes?
Oh, bless you, you've read it. So when were you at Oxford? you weren't at Oxford, so you haven't read it then. Maybe you've seen a little video about it or something like that.
And I take it from your accent, you're not native born.
I'm not native.
Where are you from?
I'm an Australian.
So we have to go all the way to Australia to find someone who's enthused about John Milton.
Absolutely.
Wow, so she's actually the only person on this bridge who hasn't been paid to enthuse about Paradise Lost. Wow. So now we have some sort of members of the public reading out bits of Paradise Lost.
And all our woe.
With loss of Eden.
Till one greater man restore us.
And regain the blissful seat.
Sing, heavenly muse.
But only sections of lines. They couldn't handle a full line. They haven't been to Oxford, so they could induce quite a serious brain injury.
I may assert
Eternal providence.
And justify the ways of God to men.
I'm not going to show you all of it because it's crap. But this is my other favourite bit. He's in this this office building with his artfully stressed copy of Paradise Lost. He probably gave it to his dog for a bit before filming to make it look like it's been read. So he's walking around this office just talking to camera.
Make a heaven of hell, a hell of heaven. Here is the start of Spin.
You can hear there the producers just desperately trying to join the two concepts of this stupid documentary together. Armando Iannucci and Paradise Lost. It's the start of Spin. Satan is he's like the original Alistair Campbell. Milton begins his poem in media res, dropping us into the thick of it, as it were, a show I created. Speaking of creation, back to the Garden of Eden. Satan in the Tree of Knowledge, in the guise of a cormorant. But perhaps, had it been a pear tree, he'd have taken the form of a partridge, Alan Partridge, another show I created. You see, it's all connected. The Book of Genesis and light entertainment programming from the BBC. The descent of man's eternal soul and his ultimate addiction to Toblerone. Whatever you think of Milton, one thing we can all agree on is I am an excellent choice to host this documentary. It actually sounds like a monkey tennis type of documentary that Partridge would come up with. Armando Iannucci puts Milton in a nutshell.
I've never seen inside first edition of Paradise Lost.
Oh, this bit just makes me absolutely...
It's very exciting.
Oh. This bit's rancid.
Sorry, I've started reading it now. Which I imagine is bad television. But I can't help myself because I've got Milton's first edition in my hands. So I'm going to read it.
Sorry, I've started reading it now. I'm terrible with books. I just read them. I've had to stop buying books. I just read them. I'm such a bloody reader. You know how you feel about Club Penguin. That's like me with books. Honestly, if I'm coming around to your house, lock up your books. I will shag them. No, all jokes aside, it's very convincing. Like I can really tell he is a proper little reader.
This is poetry telling us what spin and argument is all about. The sort of politician who says, forward to the past. Let us start building our tomorrows today. Victory in defeat. It all sounds great, especially if you do that with your finger and raise your voice, but it is meaningless nonsense.
He's got no right to be throwing around accusations of meaningless nonsense. Not in this programme, Armando. This whole documentary is just riven with meaningless nonsense. It's full of BBC cadenced fluff, which sounds authoritative but means next to nothing.
Paradise Lost is an electrifying poem about love and war, the fight between good and evil, and an obsession with human freedom that speaks to us now.
All the little scripted straw men to set up connective material to jump from one sequence to another.
And this can sometimes add to that image we have of him as someone withdrawn from the world, spending his days indoors rather than outside.
But nothing could be further from the truth.
We think of Milton, don't we, as cave-dwelling, translucent and amphibious. But actually nothing could be further from the truth.
There's nothing prissy or priggish about Milton.
Yeah, we didn't say there was, mate. You did.
And that's especially true of his description of the Garden of Eden. It's really quite a randy place.
It's expressly not a randy place.
They led the vine to wed her elm. She spoused about him twines her marriageable arms. This is just a vine going round an elm tree branch. But it sounds like they're at it like knives. She spoused about him twines.
Yeah, I hate to break it to you, Armando, but it's actually a painfully well-known classical allusion to marriage, predating Milton by centuries. It's not really about sex.
And I was looking for another passage, but on the way I came across this, which is a description of Eve serving dinner to the archangel Raphael. And it says here, "Meanwhile at table Eve ministered naked, and their flowing cups with pleasant liquors crowned. O innocence deserving paradise, if ever then had the sons of God excuse to have been enamoured at that sight. But in those hearts love unlibidinous reigned, not jealousy was understood, the injured lover's hell." That's a description basically of the angels in heaven potentially lusting after Eve. But we're told by Milton that they didn't, because they were nice and they hadn't fallen.
Meaning then that it's not a randy place. The whole point Milton is making in that section is that we would see it through our randy, fallen eyes. But as Milton says, there's nothing inherently sinful about sex or about nudity. It's just that we're all screwed up and depraved. Paradise has been lost. It's what made Voltaire say, in all other poems, love, as in making love, is a sin. In Milton only, it is a virtue. The documentary is just full of like basic take after basic take.
Tasting, concoct, digest, assimilate, and corporeal to incorporeal turn. That's the very first depiction in English literature of angel farts.
And God says, "Their will, disposed by absolute decree or high foreknowledge, they themselves decreed their own revolt, not I. If I foreknew, foreknowledge had no influence on their fault, which had no less proved certain unforeknown." I've no idea what that means. I assume you don't either.
Well, I mean, if you don't get it, Armando, I doubt anybody could. It sounds a bit like a description of free will to me, but...
Now, I am intrigued as to why Milton writes about God and heaven like this. It's a little bit dull, really. It's a bit boring.
Gosh, don't you wish you could read that PhD? This bit gets boring, and this bit's got farts.
Is it because he feels a little bit guilty about how carried away he got with himself and his own powers and abilities in describing Satan earlier on? He was almost too good at describing evil. And as a penance, has he decided to be a little bit less ostentatious when describing God? I can't quite accept that.
Oh, well, that's lucky, because the person who came up with that was, let me have a look. Oh, yeah, you. Because, yeah, it was quite a thick thing to suggest. Like, if I'd thought of that, I simply wouldn't have said it aloud.
Does Milton write a boring God because God bores him?
The idea of God boring Milton is so stupid that it actually just kind of hurts.
I wonder whether in the battle in Milton's own head between the theologian and the poet was beginning to win out.
What an interesting and sexy thought. It reminds me of that bit in RoboCop where the part of Alex that's a man eventually triumphs over the part of him that's a washing machine. Where can we read this PhD?
I think it's because in the end Milton didn't want to justify the ways of God to men. He wanted to justify the ways of men to us.
That's about as bad a misreading of Paradise Lost as you could come up with if you were trying. Paradise Lost is an evangelical text, make no bones about it. Milton, as he says, sets out to justify the ways of God to men. The central tragedy that this documentary is based on is the hopelessness of trying to justify the ways of Milton to Armando.
I never did finish my PhD on Paradise Lost. Maybe that's because the poem defies any definitive interpretation.
Yeah, that'll be it, mate. On that note, I just want to say, having risked hubris here by slagging off someone else talking about Paradise Lost, I do have my epic podcast on Paradise Lost coming out soon. You might like it, you might think it's crap, and you can, if you're an Armando Iannucci fan, you can get me back for slagging him off like a knobhead for however long this has been. But I will make 3 promises about my podcast. 1, it will contain more information about Paradise Lost and Milton than you could Google in a few seconds. 2, it won't be all about me and how great I am. And 3, I won't assume from the start that you are thick. So look out for that. Hope you've enjoyed today's video. Sorry if I've been a bit of an arsehole. Catch you next time. Bye.